Throughout history, humanity has experienced hunger as a silent plague. During World War I, agricultural collapse and economic blockade led to scarcity, misery, and death. During World War II, one of the worst famines of the century broke out. Entire cities faced food shortages, thousands died from malnutrition, and hunger became an enemy as lethal as bombs. Today, in the 21st century, hunger remains a devastating reality. Millions of people struggle day after day to survive, not knowing if they'll have anything to eat the next day. Countries such as Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia are among those most affected by extreme hunger. Children die before their 5th birthday. Mothers walk long distances just to get a little water. Entire communities survive on just one meal a day. And while in some parts of the world tons of food are thrown away, in others, people are dying simply from having nothing to eat. But all of this is merely a shadow, a faint prelude of what is about to be unleashed upon the earth. Let us pay attention to what the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 5 and 6 reveals to us. When the Lamb broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come!" I looked up and saw a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales. And I heard a voice from among the 4 living creatures say, "A wheat loaf or 3 barley loaves will cost a day's wages, and do not waste the olive oil and the wine." This is no ordinary rider. He carries neither fire nor sword. His weapon is the economy, his power, the control of resources. Wherever he treads, markets collapse, flour is measured, and hope is exchanged for a coin. Today, the world's powerful know this. They anticipate it. They've read between the lines. That's why, while the masses live oblivious, they build underground bunkers where they store seeds, purified water, and non-perishable food. In Norway, for example, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault has been built, a kind of plant Noah's Ark, protected against wars, asteroids, and climate disasters. What are they afraid of? Why don't those who govern prepare themselves with speeches, but with food supplies? Because they know that famine is coming. And when the black horse rider begins to ride, there will be no safe haven. His scales will not measure intentions, but prices. Bread will not be shared. It will be sold by weight. And the lives of the poor will be at the mercy of decisions made from on high. People will live in a world where everything can be controlled: what they eat, what they buy, and even who they choose to obey. And the question is the world already under the shadow of this horseman? Has the 3rd seal begun to open before our eyes? Dear listener, prepare yourself, because what was prophesied is underway. And when the rider on the black horse begins to ride, it will be one of the most catastrophic events humanity has ever faced. Neither you, nor I, nor anyone else will want to be present when that happens. Therefore, I invite you to watch this video until the end. I assure you that every minute will make you reflect deeply on what will soon be unleashed upon this world. There are texts in Scripture that cannot be read lightly. They were not written to entertain, they were written to warn. The book of Apocalypse is not a sealed mystery, but an open revelation. It's not confusion, it's just a denouement. What began in Genesis is consummated here. In chapter 6 of Apocalypse, the Apostle Juan contemplates how the Cordero, glorified Christ, opens the seals of a book that contains the judgment of God on a rebellious world. Only you are worthy of carrying out the sovereign plan, and with each seal that breaks, a new stage of judgment is unleashed, each one more severe than the previous one. This chapter is not about the general history of humanity, but about a specific prophetic period, the first years of the Great Tribulation, subsequent to the rapture of the Church. The world, without the corporate testimony of the body of Christ, will face a sequence of progressive judgments unleashed by the authority of Cordero. The first 4 seals unleash the so-called 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are not empty metaphors or poetic tales. They are real spiritual forces that will descend upon the earth with tangible and visible consequences. When the Lamb opens the first seal, one of the living creatures before the heavenly throne says to John in a voice like thunder, "Come." Then John recounts what he sees. "And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering, and to conquer." The first horseman refers to the Antichrist. He is the false imitator of the true Christ, who is also associated with a white horse in Revelation chapter 19. Now, at the beginning of the tribulation, the Antichrist will receive authority, a crown, and will make war, a bow, conquering all who oppose him. This description is consistent with Daniel's vision of the little horn rising to power and intent on conquest. This horn made war against the saints and prevailed against them. When the Lamb opens the second seal, the second living creature says, "Come." John looks and carefully records what he sees. "And another horse came out, a red one, and to him who sat on it was given power to take peace from the earth, and to kill one another, and to him was given a great sword." The red horse unleashes war. It is evident that after the apparent peace brought by the Antichrist, war will follow. This is precisely the main objective of the second horseman of the apocalypse. The Bible describes him riding a red horse, carrying a large sword, which clearly symbolizes the blood that will be shed through war conflicts. According to the book of Daniel, this leader will rule by military force and honor a strange god other than the true God. This same figure will destroy 3 kingdoms that initially supported him in establishing his world government. Furthermore, anyone who opposes his dictatorship will be mercilessly executed. Although the Antichrist will bring an apparent peace, it will be temporary, as it will eventually be followed by a devastating war that will cause the deaths of multitudes. Then the third seal is opened, and the black horse appears. He carries neither sword nor bow. His judgment is different, silent, but profound. It marks the beginning of controlled scarcity, structured inequality, and economic dominance that will break nations from within. Let's read Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. "When he had opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a black horse. He who sat on him had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice from the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a denarius, and 6 pounds of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine." The color black here represents affliction, hunger, and collective suffering. The rider doesn't bring war, but crisis. His tool isn't a weapon, but a scale. This judgment doesn't strike immediately. It slowly infiltrates daily life. It affects prices, resources, and our daily bread. It strikes silently. It destroys bloodlessly. It controls without raising its voice. The emergence of this third horse marks a shift in divine strategy. Deception has already gripped the masses. War has shaken the nations. Now comes something more meticulous. The economy will be disrupted. Need will be the yoke. Food will be power. The scale will be the new weapon. This is the context surrounding the black horse. A world without a church, plunged into spiritual confusion, torn apart by violence and now exposed to silent anguish. That of measured hunger, that of bread being counted, that of manipulated trade. Everything is under control, not by man, but by the Lamb who allows the seals to be opened. John didn't see a vague figure. He saw a concrete stage of God's judgment, orchestrated from heaven. And although this horseman has not yet been fully unleashed, its shadow is already cast over the world's systems. The stage is being set, and the vision will be fulfilled just as it was written. Now, the black horse of Revelation has been the subject of debate throughout the centuries. Different schools of prophetic interpretation have proposed different readings of the text, and it is necessary to understand them before proceeding with a deeper exegesis. Although many of these positions do not coincide with the clearest biblical eschatological approach, it is useful to examine them to understand how this passage has been read throughout history. The 4 main interpretations are presented below. In first place, the preterist view, the fulfilled past. This school of thought maintains that most of the prophecies of Revelation were already fulfilled in the first century, especially in the fall of Jerusalem in 70 after Christ or in the crises of the Roman Empire. In this context, the black horse would represent the famines and economic difficulties that the empire faced under certain emperors, such as Nero or Domitian. They argue that expensive wheat and scarcity reflect times of rationing, and the mention of oil and wine may reflect imperial measures to protect the upper classes or the wine and oil producing industries. This view, however, reduces the prophetic message to a past regional crisis, without future eschatological application, which is inconsistent with the progressive and universal development of judgment shown in Revelation. In second place, the historicist view, a gradual development in history. Historicists interpret the apocalypse as a chronological line of the history of the church and the world, from the first century until the second coming of Christ. From this perspective, the black horse has been linked to various periods of famine, economic corruption, and social crises. Some have linked it to the Middle Ages, where economic oppression was exercised by religious or political institutions. Others associate it with periods of economic collapse in Europe. The problem with this interpretation is that it forces the text to fit into isolated events and loses sight of the fact that the seals are part of a post-rapture judgment plan at a specific and unique time. In third place, the idealist view, a timeless symbol of evil. From this perspective, the black horse represents no literal or future event. It is understood as an image of widespread human suffering, poverty, and inequality that have always existed throughout history. In other words, the rider will not come because he is already present in every era. It is a metaphor for the perpetual suffering of the fallen world. This vision, although morally poignant, misses the specific, eschatological purpose of the seals, which are clearly marked by a sequential order of prophetic events that have not yet occurred. In fourth place, the futuristic view, literal judgment in the Great Tribulation. This is the position most consistent with the text, context, and design of Revelation. From this perspective, the black horse represents a literal judgment, which will manifest itself during the first years of the Great Tribulation, after the rapture of the church. By this time, the world will have been dominated by a global system of deception, white horse, and war, red horse. The black horse will introduce widespread economic collapse, with food shortages, extreme inflation, and rationing, not as a natural outcome, but as part of divine judgment. Its purpose is to bring distress upon the earth, dismantle human self-sufficiency, and set the stage for a controlled economic system, which will later be linked to the mark of the beast. This interpretation doesn't ignore the symbol, but neither does it reduce it to a metaphor. It recognizes its prophetic, literal, and eschatological power. This will be the approach we will take in the exposition. Before moving toward a prophetic application, it is necessary to pause and contemplate the text with reverence. We cannot lightly interpret what the Spirit has accurately revealed. Every word of Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6 was inspired to communicate truth, judgment, and eternal purpose. Therefore, to understand the magnitude of the judgment of the black horse, we must carefully scrutinize its language, its symbolism, and the cultural background in which it was revealed. This passage was not written in a vacuum, but in a Greco-Roman world where scales, denarii, wheat, and barley had concrete, everyday meanings. So let us open the text with humility and go through word by word what the Apostle John saw in that vision, guided by the Holy Spirit, to understand not only what is to come, but what God is already announcing in advance. Let's read Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6 again. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice from the midst of the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a denarius, and 6 pounds of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine. Let's analyze the Bible verses. Number 1, the black horse. The text says, "And I looked, and behold, a black horse." In Greek, black is melos. Melas is a common adjective in classical and Koine Greek, used to describe the color black or dark, applied to objects, hair, skin, smoke, wine, night, among others. In the Hellenistic and Jewish world of the 1st century, the color black, expressed in Greek as melas, was not simply a chromatic reference, but a word loaded with symbolic, emotional, and spiritual meanings. Its presence in texts, rituals, and visions had a profound impact, evoking human realities of pain, judgment, and loss. Let's see how this color was understood in that context. First, black as a symbol of mourning and grief. In Greek culture, wearing black was a visible manifestation of mourning. Mourners wore dark robes to publicly express their sadness over the death of a loved one, but this relationship with death went beyond clothing. Black horses were used in funeral processions, pulling carts carrying bodies or urns, accentuating the somber tone of the ceremony. In Greek tragedies, black represented human pain in the face of inevitable destiny, the fragility of life, and the weight of imminent death. Thus, the color black became the cultural symbol of mourning, irreversible loss, and closeness to the world of the dead. Second, blackness represents hunger and suffering. The connection between blackness and physical suffering is also present in Hebrew tradition. In Lamentations chapter 5, verse 10, the prophet Jeremiah describes the outcome of the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, saying, "Our skin was blackened like an oven because of the burning famine." Here, the Hebrew word used is shakrur, which is translated in the Greek Septuagint as melas, establishing a direct equivalence between the color black and the state of the body consumed by malnutrition. This is not an aesthetic change, but a physical transformation brought on by the severity of the famine. The color black then becomes a visible reflection of God's judgment on a rebellious nation. Famine as divine punishment, and social decay as evidence of the loss of heaven's blessing. Third, black represents spiritual darkness and silent judgment. In the Greco-Roman world, the color black was also associated with the unknown, the occult, and the funereal. The caves, the night, the shadows, and death were marked by black, which represented not only the absence of light, but also the absence of hope. In Jewish apocalyptic texts, black was used symbolically to speak of spiritual darkness, the absence of divine revelation, and the judgment that falls quietly but devastatingly. When black appeared in prophetic visions, it not only heralded danger, but a time when God seemed to have remained silent, letting chaos and sin take their course. Thus, for a 1st century reader, seeing a black horse in a vision like the one in Revelation chapter 6 was not simply an aesthetic choice. It was a profound declaration, laden with cultural and theological resonance. It heralded a time of mourning, hunger, judgment, and darkness, the inevitable outcome of a humanity that has rejected God's light. Bruce explained it with prophetic force. Black is the final stage of progressive judgment. First, truth is broken, then peace, and finally bread. This horse doesn't run, it walks. But wherever it steps, markets collapse, flour is measured, and hope is exchanged for a coin. Number 2, the scales, the new weapon of judgment. Revelation chapter 6 verse 5 says, "And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on him had a pair of scales in his hand." This detail is no accident. Unlike the red horse, whose rider carries a large sword, or the white horse, which appears with a bow or crown, the rider of the black horse does not carry a traditional weapon. He carries a scale. This seemingly harmless instrument is here the symbol of a new kind of judgment, economic, systematic, invisible, but deeply oppressive. In the original Greek, the word used for scale is zygos, which translates not only as weighing instrument, but also as yoke, that is, a symbol of burden, oppression, or dominance. This already suggests that the scene goes beyond the simple sale of grain. It is a system of control, a modern slavery imposed by economic power. The book of Proverbs, chapter 11, verse 1, says it this way: "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a proper weight delights him." This passage reminds us that, since the days of the Old Testament, the scales have been associated with corruption in trade, price manipulation, and structural injustice. In the ancient world, especially in the days of the Apostle John, scales were used by rulers to dominate populations through famine and artificial scarcity. For example, if Caesar wanted to punish a rebellious city, he didn't need to send soldiers. He simply altered the weights, controlled the granaries, or manipulated the measurements of oil and wheat. Thus, a simple scale became an economic weapon, and the people, unable to resist, fell into total submission. In regions such as Egypt, Judea, and Syria, it was common for imperial officials to falsify measures to impoverish the population and feed Rome's treasury. This turned the scales into a symbol of state injustice, of planned inequality. It wasn't an instrument of justice. It was a yoke, a form of control and punishment. When the Apostle John sees the horseman with a scale, he is not seeing a simple merchant. You are seeing the birth of a prophetic system, an economic machine designed to measure every grain, count every coin, and ensure that bread is not obtained by blessing, but by submission. Theologian David Ahn expresses it clearly in his commentary on the Apocalypse. This judgment is not manifested by explosion, but by calculation. The famine is not sudden, it is progressive. It is not total, it is strategic. This means that it is not a widespread famine that devastates everything at once, as in a war or a plague, but rather a managed crisis, a shortage controlled from the top, where every portion of food will be measured, every drop of oil rationed, and every decision will depend on the system that dominates the global economy. It's a kind of judgment that kills not with swords, but with scales. Number 3, the price of bread controlled hunger. The passage continues, "And I heard a voice from the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a denarius, and 6 pounds of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine." This statement does not come from the writer, but from a voice emanating from the throne, from the place of heavenly authority, indicating that this economic crisis is not beyond God's sovereign control. But what is being described is a critical scene: rampant inflation, a crisis of global proportions. In the first century Roman world, a denarius was the average day's wage of a worker. In normal times, that denarius could buy enough food for a family. But the text says that a single measure of wheat costs a denarius, meaning that a day's wage is barely enough to feed a single person. The Greek word for measure is choinix, which was approximately equal to 1 liter, the exact amount for a daily subsistence meal. That is, at the time of this prophecy, a father of a family would work all day just to buy his own lunch, without being able to feed his wife or children. The family would be left to starve, or would have to settle for cheaper, but less nutritious, barley. The text adds 6 pounds of barley for a denarius. In biblical times, barley was considered a grain of lower quality, used mostly to feed animals or the poor. Its mention reinforces the idea of precarious nutrition, basic survival, and impoverished diet. This is not a total famine. There is still food, but access to it is restricted, as if there were a strategic management of misery. George Eldon Ladd said, "This is not the end of food. It's the end of the dignity of work. It's the wages that aren't enough, the workday that only yields crumbs." This has happened before. This isn't the first time human history has witnessed an economic reckoning so devastating that it turned bread into a luxury more valuable than gold. Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, was an eyewitness to the siege of Jerusalem in 70 after Christ, when the Roman legions, under the command of Titus, surrounded the city for months, preventing the entry and exit of food. In his work, The Jewish Wars, Josephus describes with horror how hunger reached unimaginable levels. Bread, scarce and coveted, became so valuable that it was exchanged for weights of gold. Eating ceased to be a right and became a privilege reserved for those who could still bribe the guards or plunder their neighbors. The most innocent children who were victims of this tragedy were abandoned by their own parents, who could no longer support them. Some died crying in the streets, while others simply disappeared. The mothers, who had previously cradled them, now cried alone, consumed by despair. Some, even according to Josephus himself, went so far as to devour their own children, in scenes so chilling that the Roman soldiers, upon discovering them, were horrified. However, a similar scene had already occurred in Israel during the terrible siege of Babylon. Let us read Lamentations, chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Happier were those who were killed by the sword than those who were killed by famine, for they died little by little for lack of the fruits of the land. The hands of godly women boiled their children. Their own children served them as food in the day of the destruction of the daughter of my people. The prophet declares that happier were those who died by the sword than those who died by hunger, revealing that the slow, physical pain caused by lack of food was even more unbearable than immediate death in battle. This speaks not only of physical suffering, but also of the emotional, spiritual, and moral collapse of a nation that had been called by God to walk in holiness. The following description is even more disturbing. The hands of godly women boiled their children. They were food for them in the day of calamity for the daughter of my people. This verse should not be seen as a simple image of human despair, but as a vivid illustration of what happens when a society completely turns away from God. The term godly women highlights that even the most noble and compassionate were driven to unthinkable extremes by judgment. Hunger, war, loss, and social collapse have all come to the point of breaking the natural fabric of maternal love. A certain author comments on this passage where he says, "They cooked their children," he explains. "They were boiled rather than roasted, to prevent the smell from giving them away, and thus avoid the risk of others coming to snatch them away, as happened during the last Roman siege." This historical event not only illustrates what famine can do under an oppressive regime, but also anticipates what the apocalypse prophesies with the black horse. In both cases, it wasn't a simple natural shortage, it was a judgment, a controlled system that left the people without food, without freedom, and without hope. What Jerusalem was during the Babylonian and Roman sieges will be a shadow of what the entire world will experience under the judgment of the third seal. A land without bread, governed by scales and prices, where hunger will not be a product of chance, but the result of intentional and ruthless control. Number 4. Do not harm the oil or the wine. Exclusion of the rich? The verse concludes with a phrase that has been the subject of much debate, but do not harm the oil or the wine. At first glance, this seems like a preservation order. Oil and wine must not be affected by this crisis. What does this mean? There are several interpretations, but in the historical and symbolic context, the most widely accepted among scholars is that hunger will strike the working classes, but the luxuries of the powerful will remain intact. Both oil and wine were products that, although also used by the common people, were characteristic of commerce, worship, and opulence. In times of crisis, the people suffered from a lack of bread, but wine still flowed at palace banquets. Oil continued to be anointed on royal heads, but it did not bake the poor's bread. Commentator Robert Mounce explains, the preservation of oil and wine indicates that this economic crisis is regulated and not a total devastation, but rather a measured pressure aimed at a protected elite, while the people suffer from scarcity. In other words, this judgment allows the symbols of luxury and commerce, oil and wine, to remain, while the staple food of wheat and barley is strictly rationed. This describes not just physical scarcity, but engineered inequality, where the elite are left untouched, but the majority are subjected to a system of economic control. This command shows that judgment will be unequal. The powerful will not experience the same scarcity. They will continue to eat well. They will continue to drink. While the people measure their grain, the rulers will raise full cups. Grant Osborne wrote, "The oil and wine will be untouched because judgment will reveal inequality. Suffering will be measured, and with it, the true heart of the world will be exposed." The judgment won't be total. It will be selective, because God doesn't just judge with hunger, he judges with a mirror. Now, the judgment of the third seal, represented by the black horse and the famine it unleashes, does not appear as an isolated event, but as a direct consequence of the second seal. That is, from the appearance of the red horse, a symbol of war, because when peace is withdrawn from the earth, what follows is a chain reaction of collapse. Violence erupts. cities are destroyed. People are uprooted, and blood flows like rivers. But behind every armed conflict, sooner or later, rises an even more feared scourge: hunger. War doesn't just kill with the sword. It kills with its most lasting consequence: the destruction of livelihoods. The peasant flees, the market closes, trade is disrupted, roads are looted, and bread becomes scarce. When peace disappears, there is no one to sow, no one to harvest, no one to transport. Fields are barren, granaries empty, and national economies collapse like towers of dust. Inflation soars, the currency loses value, salaries no longer buy food, and desperation takes hold in every home. History is a witness. From the ruins of Jerusalem during the Babylonian and Roman sieges, where, according to Josephus, mothers ate their own children, until the world wars of the 20th century, where millions died not only from bombs, but from lack of food. Cities like Samaria and Jerusalem became burning furnaces, without wheat, without water, without hope. But what comes in the Great Tribulation will not be just another episode of human suffering, nor the fruit of corruption or negligence of governments, but a judgment sent directly from heaven, executed with divine precision upon a rebellious humanity. This judgment will be unprecedented. The coming famine will not be the result of a prolonged drought or an extreme weather event. It will be the direct consequence of having opened the door to war, chaos, and hatred, and having closed the door to the Word of God. The Lamb will open the third seal, and famine will enter like an untamed beast, bringing despair upon peoples, nations, and continents. And the impact will be brutal, because when the human stomach is touched, when bread disappears from the table and the cries of children mix with the growling of empty stomachs, man is prepared for anything. Hunger breaks wills, destroys convictions, and erases principles. When the body weakens and the mind becomes clouded, many will forget morality, faith, honor, and freedom. They'll sell themselves for a bowl of barley. They'll give up everything to avoid starving to death. As Ezekiel prophesied, chapter 4, verse 16, "Then he said to me, 'Son of man, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem. They will eat bread by weight and in anxiety, and they will drink water by measure and in fear.'" And as the prophet Jeremiah experienced it during the siege of Jerusalem, Lamentations, chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, describes it with heart-rending pain. "Even jackals give suck and nurse their young. The daughter of my people is cruel like ostriches in the wilderness. The tongue of the nursing child cleaved to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The little ones asked for bread, and there was no one to break it unto them." This is how it will be in the Great Tribulation. It won't be symbolic stories. It will be real. The streets will be filled with lines. The houses will be empty of food. Hunger will not only affect the body, but the soul. And then many will surrender to the Antichrist system, not out of conviction, but out of hunger, because whoever controls the wheat will control the world. Now, while it is true that John saw wheat and barley, the staple foods of his time, the essence of the prophetic message transcends time. What Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 to 6 shows us is not simply an ancient image, but an eschatological reality that will take modern form after the rapture of the church. The black horse represents scarcity, inflation, inequality, and rationing. But today, in a globalized digital world highly dependent on the financial system, this judgment will take a devastating form. What in John's time was wheat and barley will today be rice, flour, milk, electricity, water, fuel, medicines, and digital access to basic services. All of these will gradually become scarce. The text says that a denarius, a day's wage, will barely cover a single ration. It's the perfect symbol of hyperinflation. Money loses its value. Work yields nothing. Purchasing power is disappearing. The minimum wage won't even buy a meal. Like the worst economic crises in history, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and interwar Germany, but on a global scale. In Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 19, it says, "They will throw their money into the street. They will throw it away like garbage. Neither their silver nor their gold will save them when the day of the Lord's anger comes. They will neither satisfy nor feed them, for their greed only causes them to stumble." During that prophetic time described in the book of Revelation, The world will experience an unprecedented crisis: wars, famines, plagues, and persecutions. In the midst of this chaos, the global economic system will collapse, and material goods, which for centuries were the center of human pride and security, will become completely useless. Banks will close their doors. Physical currency will become worthless. Stock markets will collapse. Access to basic goods will depend on your identification within a system. The writer carries a scale. In ancient times, this was used to weigh bread and measure oil. Today, it represents digitalized rationing, state intervention, and biometric consumption control. Purchasing will be measured, tracked, and restricted. People will only be able to access certain resources under strict conditions. This isn't fiction. Digital identity systems, central bank-controlled electronic currencies, and access to subsidies through facial scanning or codes are being tested right now. The technology already exists. All that's missing is the trigger, and that trigger will be this crisis. Inflation will be the most effective weapon to bring nations to their knees. Prices will rise while wages freeze. The middle classes will disappear, and the poor will have no choice but to submit to the new power structure. And it is in this context that the Antichrist will begin to gain power. The middle classes will disappear, and the poor will have no choice but to submit to the new power structure. And it is in this context that the Antichrist will begin to gain power. As Daniel chapter 8 verse 25 said, "By his subtlety he shall make deceit prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall rise up against the Prince of Princes." Let us remember that the Antichrist will emerge in a collapsed world, marked by crisis, war, and despair. In the midst of chaos, he will present himself as a savior, offering peace, stability, and prosperity. Many will admire him, deceived by his charisma and promises. But behind his redeeming appearance lies a sinister purpose: to subjugate humanity, usurp the glory of God, and lead the entire world to the worship of his image, establishing a perverse and anti-Christian system. Therefore, the Black Horse, in the modern time of the tribulation, represents the total collapse of the global economic system. It will be apocalyptic inflation, structural shortages, and a progressive system of control that sets the stage for the total domination of the Antichrist. The world will receive him with hope. Why? Because the masses, destroyed by war, second seal, and broken by famine, third seal, they will seek order, food, security, leadership, and access to the system, and he will offer all of that, but in exchange for submission. Revelation chapter 13 verses 16 and 17 says, "And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one might buy or sell, except one who had the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." This indicates that the economic solution the Antichrist will propose will be accompanied by a spiritual and political condition: absolute loyalty to the system. Hunger will have already prepared hearts. Necessity will have overcome resistance, and then the brand will be imposed. Economic control becomes a system of worship. What began as an inflationary crisis will become a global system of identification, access, and dependency. This brand will not simply be a symbol, but a unified economic system and a spiritual sign of loyalty. Many biblical scholars, such as John Walvoord and Charles Ryrie, interpret this mark as a visible and verifiable form of identification and economic access, but which also implies accepting the authority of the Antichrist as a living God. It will be the point of transition between chaos and control. First, there was hunger. Then came the economic solution. But the solution came with a condition: worship the beast or starve. This will fulfill what is said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. "For this reason God sends them a strong delusion, so that they will believe a lie." And Jesus anticipated this when he said false Christs and false prophets would come with great signs. This will be the complete fulfillment: a leader who takes control of hunger, the economy, and the soul. Prophetic technology: what was once a scale will now be a digital system, the Black Horse scale, which in ancient times was a symbol of rationing. will now be a global system based on artificial intelligence, biometric recognition, digital currency, and data control. Already being tested, central bank digital currencies, single identity systems, digital passports, and facial scan verification. All of this will be used by the Antichrist as the foundation of his global economic network. What is presented as progress today will be oppression tomorrow. And those who do not accept this system will be excluded. As Revelation chapter 13, verse 15 says, "And he was given power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image to be killed." Hunger will be the whip, the system, the chain, and the brand, the ultimate proof of submission. Dear friend, this is the reality we face today, a true reflection of the suffering experienced by the globalized world of the 21st century. The prophetic scenario revealed to us with the arrival of the third rider, the one on the black horse, announces a time of hunger and anguish such as has never been seen before in the history of humanity. The reason we've delved a little deeper into this grim prophecy is because there are already clear signs that allow us to gauge its seriousness. Currently, millions of people lack what are considered basic necessities in developed countries. There have always been poor people, yes, but then scarcity and pain will spread on a global scale, affecting all nations without distinction. As early as 1798, Reverend Thomas Malthus concluded that the growing needs of the population exceeded the capacity of the earth. To produce enough food to feed all of humanity, he warned that the day would come when the world would face a global famine. Decades later, in 1959, representatives of the 70 nations that then comprised the United Nations met in Rome with the goal of combating hunger and malnutrition. During that summit, historian Arnold Toynbee stated with concern, "Sooner or later, food production will reach a limit. And if the population continues to grow unchecked, famine will execute the same judgment that plague, war, and famine itself, all combined, did in the past." Sir John Boyd Orr, who was Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, stated while in office, "I will conclude my work with one final warning to the world. If this problem is not resolved, we will face global chaos in the next 50 years. Nations are divided and alienated from one another." This was his forceful statement. Today, millions of people live without knowing what it means to be free from hunger. Thousands die every day, not from incurable diseases, but from lack of food and chronic malnutrition. However, all of this will be nothing compared to what will come when the prophesied judgment is unleashed with the appearance of the black horse in Revelation chapter 6. The coming famine will be global, calculated, and devastating, a shadow of divine judgment on a world that ignored the warnings. Dear listeners, after reading this message, the question is unavoidable. Are you prepared for the rapture of the church? Is your life in order with God? Is your heart clean, firm, and awake, or distracted, lukewarm, and confused by the cares of this world? We've talked about trials that aren't symbolic, but real, about difficult times ahead, about a system that's being formed right now before our eyes. But before all this is fully manifested, the church will be raptured. Are you among that faithful church that will be raptured? Or will you be among those who remain to face hunger, chaos, and the world government of the man of sin? Today is the time to examine our hearts with sincerity. It is time to return to intimacy with God, to live a life of genuine holiness, not of religious pretense. It's time to abandon sin, not to seek excuses to sustain it. It's the day to close the doors to spiritual lukewarmness once and for all, and surrender ourselves completely to the Lord in a life of true consecration. And so we come to the end of this video. We sincerely hope that it has been a blessing to your life, that it has stirred your soul and prompted you to urgently seek the face of God. Don't ignore the voice of the Holy Spirit. Don't put off what heaven has revealed to you today. Christ is coming soon, and only those who are ready will go with him. We'll see you again in the next video. May the grace and peace of the Lord be with you. God bless you.